Oh, that's why. Okay. All right. Sorry about that, everybody. Everything was out of place for no reason. All right. Now we're working. Anyway, how's it going, everybody? This is my show. We're going to do some more Heidegger. All right, we're going to do some more Being in Time by Heidegger. We're going to take this in... I'm going to break it up a little bit more than going like an hour and then like running or whatever. So we're going to go roughly more every 30 minutes. Okay? We're now past the introductions, and now we're in the book proper. We are going to be starting at part 1, the interpretation of design in terms of temporality and the explication of time as the transcendental horizon for the question of being. So this gets into the weeds of design in its proper context, in function of its association with past, present, and future, right? Giving this tripartite point of view that we appeal to the Dasein towards in understanding our state of being. Division 1, Preparatory Fundamental Analysis of Design. In the question about the meaning of being, what is primarily interrogated is those entities which have the character of design, the preparatory, existential, analytic of design must, in accordance with its peculiar character, be expounded in outline and distinguished from other kinds of investigation which seem to run parallel to Chapter 1, adhering to procedure which we have fixed upon for starting our investigation. We must lay bare a fundamental structure in design being in the world. Chapter 2. In the interpretation of design, this structure is something a priori. It is not pieced together, but is primordially and constantly a whole. It affords us, however, various ways of looking at the items which are constitutive for it. The whole of this structure always comes first, but if we keep this constantly in view, these items as phenomena will be made to stand out, and thus we shall have as objects for analysis the world in its worldhood, Chapter 3. Being in the world as being with and being oneself, Chapter 4, and being in as such, Chapter 5. By analysis of this fundamental structure, the being of design can be indicated provisionally. Its existential meaning is care, Chapter 6. And that's interesting that it goes to care, because there's something to be said about what care is, because we, of course, lived through dark care throughout 2020 and 2021, as the unconscious evil of our civilization somehow we had to see it without them seeing it themselves, and then change it despite them changing it themselves. Isn't that interesting? Like, that's why this time makes no sense. It has this unfair non-resolve. Everything is in kind of a false resolve of 2020, and that's what's annoying me the most about it, right? My state of being is off kilter because nothing resolved for anybody. The normies didn't get resolution, and neither did conspiracy theorists, conspiracy analysts, and truthers, and everybody else who felt like if the timeline had kept going without interruption the way that it had, we were going to break through and see a very different future. And it hurts to put yourself in a disposition of saying that is not the state of being we are living in anymore, where future is moving that way. That is the first thing that comes to mind when I think of being and time in respects to where we're at, why, how we got here, and the consequences of where we're going. Excuse me. Exposition of the task of a preparatory analysis of design. 9. The theme of the analytic of design. We are ourselves the entities to be analyzed. The being of any such entity is in each case mine. Das Sende Design analyse zur Aufgabe steht, sind wir je selbst das Sein dieses Senden ist je meins. The reader must not get the impression that there is anything solipsistic about the second of these sentences. The point is merely that the kind of being which belongs to design is of a sort which any of us may call his own. I'm intrigued that he made a solipsism disclaimer, that this is not solipsism. I find that very interesting. These entities, in their being, comport themselves towards their being as entities with such being. They are delved over to their own being. Als Sendes dieses Seins ist es seinen eigenen Sein überantwortet. The earlier editions read seinen eigenen zu sein. Being is that which is an issue for every such entity. There's only 3 annotations on this page, and they're all in the first passage. Interesting amount of remarks that needed to be said in the opening statements. Let's see what we got for 3. And it's talking about seeing the notes, seeing note 2, page 28 or P28, H8 above. Excuse me. 1. The essence, Wesen, of this entity lies in its to be, or zu sein. Its being what it is, was sein, the essentia, must, so far as we speak of it at all, be conceived in terms of its being, existentia. But here, our ontological task is to show that when we choose to designate the being of this entity as existence, this term does not and cannot have the ontological signification of the traditional terms existentia. Ontologically, existentia is tantamount to being present at hand, a kind of being which is essentially inappropriate to entities of Dasein's character. To avoid getting bewildered, we shall always use the interpretive expression of presence at hand for the term existentia, while the term existence as a designation of being will be allotted solely to Dasein. Okay, so what I find here is, so we've got these two different signs, and then existentia to kind of make up a trinity of parts of Dasein, right? And so this entity lies in its to be, which is zu sein. It's being what it is, was sein. All right? So to be, that's the future, right? That's saying what it is going to be. What is that going to be? Zu sein. Being what it is, that is the present. And what something is an evaluation of its worth. And so thus worthandi, the worth of the matter. And then we speak of it at all. Essentially, so the essence or the Wesen of this entity lies in its zu sein. Its was sein must, so far as we speak of it at all, be conceived in terms of its being existentia. So, in order to get the existentia, the existentia is the foundational establishment that the other two are springing forth from. Which makes perfect sense, because that if you want your third norn of Erd, or origins, earth, right? So your existentia is related primarily to your past. But then, because it's all-encompassing your Dasein, which is kind of a mix of the three, as it's operating to try to order these things from the abstract into the cognitive, especially through this Dasein process. You have to look at its was sign and zu sign. Okay, but here, right. Okay, so that's everything I wanted to say about it. So, the essence of design lies in its existence. Accordingly, those characteristics which can be exhibited in this entity are not properties present at hand of some entity which looks so and is itself present at hand. They are, in each case, possible ways for it to be, and no more than that, all the being as it is, so sign. Being as it is. So that's very interesting, because to be is so sign. Being as it is, that's also the present, right? Being what it is and being as it is are two different perceptions of the present. The what and the as, which this entity possesses, is primarily being. So when we designate this entity with the term design, we are expressing not its what, as if it were a table, house, or tree, but its being. That being, which is an issue for the entity in its very being, is in each case mine. Thus, the sign is never to be taken ontologically as an instance of or social case of some genus of entities as things that are present at hand. Hold on. As vorhandenen, the earlier editions have the adjective vorhandenen instead of the substantive. To entities such as these, their being is a matter of indifference. Gleichgültig. This adjective must be distinguished from the German adjective indifferent, though they might both ordinarily be translated by the English indifferent, which we shall reserve exclusively for the former. In most passages, the latter is best translated by undifferentiated or without further differentiation. Occasionally, however, it seems preferable to translate it by indifferent. With an initial capital, we shall follow similar conventions with the nouns gleichgültigkeit and indifferenz. Okay? So it's very interesting. Like, people that translate philosophy books, you know, that they've got to have, like, the hardest. They must have one of the hardest jobs in the writing industry, to translate a book like that, which is already playing with language and creating language, such as with the word design being a created word from some compounding that Heidegger did with these other ideas. You know, Zerilath, like I said, is a compounded word that I transformed into my cool name. Let me see here. I don't see any chat activity, and I've not noticed anybody in the live stream. So I'm just shooting at the wind here at 10 p.m. on a Saturday night. That's okay. All right. Or more precisely, they are such that their being can be neither a matter of indifference to them nor the opposite, because design has in each case mindness. Gemeinigkeit. One must always use a personal pronoun when one addresses it. I am, you are. Furthermore, in each case, design is mine to be in one way or another. Design has also made some sort of decision as to the way in which it is, in each case, mine, or j'ai mines. That entity, which in its being has this very being as an issue, comports itself towards its being as its own most possibility. In each case, design is its possibilities, and it has this possibility, but not just as a property or an eigenschaftlich, as something present at hand would, and because design is in each case essentially its own possibility, it can in its very being choose itself and win itself. It can also lose itself and never win itself, or only seem to do so, but only insofar as it is essentially something which can be authentic, that is, something of its own. Und weil Design wesenhaft sein Möglichkeit ist, kann dieses Sehen in Szenen sein sich selbst fallen gewinnen. Es kann sich wählen, bisweilen nie und nur scheinbar gewinnen, verloren haben kann, es sich nur noch nicht sich gewonnen haben kann, es nur sofern es seinem Wesen nach mögliches Ähnliches, das heißt sich sorgen ist. Older editions have je wesenhaft and zugänglich. The connections between eigentlich, authentic or real, and eigen own is lost in translation. Almost back. There we are. Can it have lost itself and not yet won itself? As modes of being, authenticity and inauthenticity, these expressions have been chosen terminologically in a strict sense, are both grounded in the fact that any Dasein whatsoever is characterized in meiness. Das Dasein überhaupt durch Gemeinheit bestimmt ist. All right. But the inauthenticity of Dasein does not signify any less being or any lower degree of being. Rather, it is the case that even in its fullest concretion, Dasein can be characterized by authenticity. When busy, when excited, when interested, when ready for enjoyment, the two characteristics of Dasein, which we have sketched, the priority of existentia over essentia, and the fact that Dasein is in each case mine, or die Gemeinheit, have already indicated that in the analytic of this entity, we are facing a peculiar phenomenal domain. Dasein does not have the kind of being which belongs to something merely present at hand within the world, nor does it ever have it. So neither it is to be presented thematically as something we come across in the same way as we come across what is present at hand. The right way of presenting it is so far from self-evident that to determine what form it shall take is itself an essential part of the ontological analytic of the entity. Only by presenting this entity in the right way can we have any understanding of its being. No matter how provisional our analysis may be, it always requires the assurance that we have started correctly. Whew! Man, this dries me out. Ugh, hang on a second, guys. I am so sorry. Okay, I'll be taking a break in a few minutes. Not yet. In determining itself as an entity, Dasein always does so in the light of a possibility which it is itself and which in its very being is somehow understands. This is the formal meaning of Dasein's existential constitution, but this tells us that if we are to interpret this entity ontologically, the problematic of its being must be developed from the existentiality of its existence. This cannot mean, however, that Dasein is to be construed in terms of some concrete possible idea of existence. At the outset of our analysis, it is particularly important that Dasein should not be interpreted with the differentiated character difference, or some definite way of existing, but that it should be uncovered, aufgedeckt, in the indifferentiated character which it has proximately and for the most part, this undifferentiated character of Dasein's everydayness is not nothing but a positive phenomenal characteristic of this entity. Out of this kind of being and back into it again is all existing such as it is. Aus dieser Seinsart heraus und in sei Zoruk ist als existieren wie es ist. Gotta love these out of context German expressions. All right, where are we here? We call the everyday undifferentiated character of Dasein averageness, the Durchschnittlichkeit. And because this average everydayness makes up what is ontically proximal for this entity, it has again and again been passed over in explicating design. That which is ontically closest and well known is ontological, and farthest and not known at all, and its ontological significations is constantly overlooked. When Augustine asked, quid autem propinquis mipso mici, and must answer, ego cert labor hic et laboro in mipso factus sum mici terra difficultatis et suderis nimi. Which, I think we have a translation. No, that's not a 2. Where is that supposed to be the 2? Did I miss the 2? No, the 1's up there. The 2 is down here at the bottom. Okay. All right, so never mind. This applies not only to the ontical and pre-ontological opaqueness of design, but even more to the ontological task which lies ahead. For not only must this entity not be missed in that kind of being in which it is phenomenally closest, but it must be made accessible by a positive characterization. Design's average everydayness, however, is not to be taken as a mere aspect. Here too, and even in the mode of inauthenticity, the structure of existentiality lies a priori, and here to Design's being is an issue for it in a definite way, and Design comports itself towards it in the mode of average everydayness, even if this is only the mode of fleeing in the face of it and forgetfulness thereof. Ocht in get es dem Design in bestemter weis sein zu dem es sich im Modus der durchschnittlichen Alltaglichkeit verhält und sei es auch nur im Modus der Flucht, devor und des Wegrissensiner. For further discussion, see section 40 below. All right, let me see here. This is page 70. Give me a moment. So that's page, okay, that's page 1, right? And this goes, why does it say 53? That can't be right. 70, okay, 7 more pages. All right. Yeah. All right, so I'm not going to try and go 7 more pages before I take one of my breaks. We're about half hour into the show, and I'm going to give myself a breather from talking. And so I am going to run the infinite wheel of intermission and play some more master boot record for you. Hey, there we go. Good. There will probably be an ad. It's the end of the song. They threw a damn ad in the middle of that song. And like I'm like, what? Who hired you? At any rate. Alright, there we go. Okay. Okay, everybody, welcome back. Ariel had popped in here. I think he left, but he was here. How's it going, Ariel? We are going to jump right back in and at least bang out 7 more pages. But the explication of design in its average everydayness does not give us just average structures in the sense of a hazy indefiniteness. Anything which taken ontically is in an average way can be very well grasped ontologically in pregnant structures, which may be structurally indistinguishable from certain ontological characteristics. Bestimungen of an authentic being of design. All explicata to which the analytic of design gives rise are obtained by considering design's existence structure. Because design's characters of being are defined in terms of existentiality, we call them existentialia. These are to be sharply distinguished from what we call categories, characteristics of being for entities whose character is not that of design. So I'm thinking, because I don't think that we gain a tremendous amount from me just reading the German. And you don't need to hear me butchering German as I'm trying to read it in real time and probably ignoring what I'm supposed to do with the umlauts. I am not going to read anything that doesn't have any English in it. Okay? It has to have, and that includes, and see page 452, or what, I wasn't going to do that extra mile anyway, so that doesn't count, right? So it has to have, like, contextual English to the anecdote. Otherwise, you'll see it on the screen, and you can go check it out yourself and make your own judgment, okay? So we don't read this one because I don't want to anymore. Let's see. Here we are taking the expression category in its primary ontological signification and abiding by it in the ontology of the ancients. The entities we encounter within the world. Now this one this one I am going to read. Das innerhalb der Welt begegnen sind. More literally, the entity that encounters within the world. While Heidegger normally uses the verb begegnen in this active, intransitive sense, a similar construction with the English encounter is unidiomatic and harsh. We shall, as a rule, use either a passive construction, as in entities encountered, or an active transitive construction, as in entities we encounter. Are taken as the basic examples for the interpretation of being. Nuelve, or the logos, as the case may be, is accepted as a way of access to them. Let's see. This one I will read. Als Zugensat, so ihm gilt das Welv Bisou del Logos. Here we follow the reading of the earlier editions. In the later editions, Zugensat, which is used rather often, is here replaced by Zugensort, which occurs very seldom and is perhaps a misprint. This later version might be translated as follows. Vulv, or the logos as the case may be, is accepted as the locus of access to such entities. On vulv and logos, see section 7 above, especially H32-34. Entities are encountered therein, but the being of these entities must be something which can be grasped in a distinctive kind of this Greek term, letting something be seen, so that this being becomes intelligible in advance as that which it is and as that which it is already in every entity. In any discussion, logos, of entities, we have previously addressed ourselves to being. This addressing is then a huge term in the Greek, but we also have an anecdote, so let's see what we get. There's no English in that anecdote, so we don't know. This signifies, in the first instance, making a public accusation, taking someone to task for something in the presence of everyone. When used ontologically, this term means taking an entity to task, as it were, for whatever it is an entity. That is to say, letting everyone see it in its being. The Greek term are what is cited and what is visible in such a seeing. All right, nothing there. They include the various ways in which the nature of those entities, which can be addressed and discussed in a Greek term way, may be determined a priori. Existentialia and categories are the two basic possibilities for characters of being. The entities which correspond to them require different kinds of primary interrogation. Respectively, any entity is either a who, existence, or a what, presence at hand, in the broadest sense. So yeah, those are two different states of the present, two different states of Dandi, if you will, right? I have to think about this in a Norn type of way. The connection between these two modes of the characters of being cannot be handled until the horizon for the question of being has been clarified. In our introduction, we have already intimated that in the existential analytic of design, we also make headway with a task which is hardly less pressing than that of the question of being itself. The task of laying bare that a priori basis which must be visible before the quest of what man is can be discussed philosophically. The existential analytic of design comes before any psychology or anthropology, and certainly before any biology. While these two are ways in which design can be investigated, we can define the theme of our analytic with greater precision if we distinguish it from these, and at the same time the necessity of that analytic can thus be proved more incisively. 10. How the analytic of design is to be distinguished from the anthropology, psychology, and biology. After a theme for investigation has been initially outlined in positive terms, it is always important to show what it is to be ruled out, although it can easily become fruitless to discuss what is not going to happen. We must show that some investigations and formulations of the question which have been aimed at designs heretofore have missed the real philosophical problem, notwithstanding their objective fertility, and that as long as they persist in missing it, they have no right to claim that they can accomplish that for which they are basically striving. In distinguishing the existential analytic from the anthropology, psychology, and biology, we shall confine ourselves to what is, in principle, the ontological question. Our distinction will necessarily be inadequate from the standpoint of scientific theory, simply because the scientific structure of the above-mentioned disciplines, not indeed the scientific attitude of those who work to advance them, in today thoroughly questionable and needs to be attacked in new ways, which must have their source in ontological problematics. Historiologically, the aim of the existential analytic can be made plainer by considering Descartes, who is credited with providing the point of departure for modern philosophical inquiry by his discovery of the cogito sum. It's always cogitare. I thought it was cognito. Why does it say cogito? I'm going to take a moment and ponder the orb on this. Give me a moment here to Latin cogito. Often preceded by, sometimes capitalized, the argument cogito ergo sum. Yeah, cogito, but it's cogito, not cognito. I think, therefore, I am, right. Hold on a second. Cognito. Particle. Now, cognitus. Fourth declinate. Cogito. A Latin dictionary. Just give me the cognitus. Yeah, meaning all fabulous forms of inflection and conjugulation. I guess they're both. I don't know. It's like they both mean the same thing. I guess it's fine. But it's cogito and cognito, I guess, depending on who you ask. I don't know. Am I just really confused, or is that possibly a Mandela effect for me? I don't know, because it seems to acknowledge both, which is a little weird, but also ironic if it be true. Okay. He investigates the cogitaire, or the ego, at least within certain limits. On the other hand, he leaves the sum completely undiscussed, even though it is regarded as no less primordial than the cogito, or cogito. Hey, what's up, Telling Stewart? Our analytic raises the ontological question of the being of the sum. Not until the nature of this being has been determined can we grasp the kind of being which belongs to cogitations. At the same time, it is, of course, misleading to exemplify the aim of our analytic historiologically in this way. One of our first tasks will be to prove that if we post an I or subject as that which is proximally given, we shall completely miss the phenomenal content, bestand of design, ontologically, every idea of a subject, unless refined by a previous ontological determination of its basic character, still posits the subjectum along with it, no matter how vigorous one's ontical protestations against the sole substance of the reification of consciousness. The thinghood itself, which such reification implies, must have its ontological origin demonstrated if we are to be in position to ask what we are to understand positively when we think of the unreifed being of the subject. The soul, the consciousness, the spirit, the person, all these terms refer to definite phenomenal domains which can be given form, or årsformer, but they are never used without a notable failure to see the need for inquiring about the being of the entities thus designated. So we are not being terminologically arbitrary when we avoid these terms or such expressions as life and man in designating those entities which we are ourselves. On the other hand, if we understand it rightly in any serious and scientifically minded philosophy of life, this expression says about as much as the botany of plants. There lies in unexpressed tendencies towards an understanding of Design's being. What is conspicuous in such a philosophy, and here it is defective in principle, is that here life itself as a kind of being does not become ontologically a problem. I think this is whether he knows it or not, he's basically just trying to understand the judgment of the norns. His language is worded in such a funny way where, if you really pick apart at it enough, he's talking about the issue of what something was, is, and potentially to be. And then, this stuff can glaze over on you real fast when you're reading it so much because of how, often it almost feels like he's repeating himself, right? Because he's got a very ironclad concept, and he's casting a very complicated spell that brings us to enlightenment by catching this elusive thing that he has noticed through the micromanagement of how he feels and experiences and perceives from moment to moment to moment. Because he's trying to capture the essence of being. And he's kind of using design as a prototype, almost an egregore, or some sort of, it's some sort of mechanism that gives you that Norn interface, almost, right? That's kind of what I'm picking up about it. That's as I'm reading it, at the very least, in real time, my shaman brain goes to uncoding, decoding it this way, and putting that together, and now I have this structure in my arsenal, right? So thus far, this book is doing a good job at leveling me up. All right. The researchers of Wilhelm Dilthey were stimulated by the perennial question of life. Starting from life itself as a whole, he tried to understand its experiences. It's funny that they use the word perennial here because perennial is and annual is the word that I'm surrounded with all year, working at my job and understanding that we use the term annual in our business to mean one and done, meaning it's not going to make it, not even indoors. You're going to have to buy a new one next year. It's going to die. You get them for the year, and then that's that. Because of the zone we're in, right? And then we use the word perennial for continual. It'll just live for as long as those plants are meant to live if they stay in a favorable winter. Okay. Okay, so dein Erlebnisak deines Lebens. The connection between Leben, or life, and Erlebnis, experiences, is lost in translation. And Erlebnis is not just any experience, Erfahrung, but one which we feel deeply and live through. We shall translate Erlebnis and Erleben by experience with a capital E, reserving experience for Erfahrung and Erfahren. In their structural and developmental interconnections, his here we go. His Geisteswissenschaftliche Psychology is one which no longer seeks to be oriented towards physical elements and atoms or to piece the life of the soul together, but aims rather at Gestalten and life as a whole. Its philosophical relevance, however, is not to be sought here, but rather in the fact that in all that this he was above all on his way towards the question of life. To be sure, we can also see here very plainly how limited were both his problematics and set of concepts with which it had to be put into words. I think he's still I can't tell if he's challenging Descartes right now or if he's I guess he's challenging Dilthey. He's jumping off of a misconception that Dilthey had in his argument. He is arguing. These limitations, however, are found not only in Dilthey and Bergson, but in all the personalitic movements of which they have given direction in every tendency towards a philosophical anthropology. The phenomenological interpretation of personality is in principle more radical and more transparent, but the question of the being of design has a dimension which this too fails to enter, no matter how much Husserl and Schiller may differ in their respective inquiries, in their methods of conducting them, and in their orientations towards the world as a whole. Their fully in agreement on the negative side of their interpretations of personality. The question of personal being itself is one which they no longer raise. We have chosen Schiller's interpretation as an example, not only because it is accessible in print, but because he emphasizes personal being explicitly as such and tries to determine its character by defining the specific being of acts as contrasted with anything physical. For Schiller, the person is never to be thought of as a thing or a substance. The person is rather the unity of living through Erlebens, which is immediately experienced in with our experiences, not a thing merely thought of being outside what is immediately experienced. Hang on a second. All right, I see there's like little VIs and stuff here, but I don't see. I think those are other reference points from other stuff that's been annotated. I'm not going to worry about it. All right. Where was I? The person is no thing-like and substantial being, nor can the being of a person be entirely absorbed in being a subject of rational acts which follow certain laws. This person is not a thing, not a substance, not an object. Here, Schiller is emphasizing what Husserl suggests when he insists that the unity of the person must have a constitution essentially different from that required for the unity of things of nature. All right, now this has a proper 1 in front of it, which I'm not going to read it. Where was I? What Schiller says of the person he applies to acts as well, but an act is never also an object, for it is essential to the being of acts that they are experienced only in their performance itself and given in reflections. Acts are something non-physical. Essentially, the person exists only in the performance of intentional acts and is therefore essentially not an object. Any physical objectification of acts, and hence any way of taking them as something physical, is tantamount to depersonalization. So, okay, that's anyway. Acts are something non-physical. Essentially, the person exists only in the performance of intentional acts and is therefore essentially not an object. Okay, all right, I'm vibing with that. It's trying to get to the spiritual, the soul level of what's going on when you do things. What's going on when the physical is involved with it, right? And this gets back to Heidegger's problem with subject matter, right? And this is him getting back to his argument from the introduction about subject matter in science. Taking away the humanity, the personalization of experience. And he is also making a point that that he is making an early dissension from what philosophies are the ones being adopted by the scientific community as a way of talking about the personal application of the new understandings in physics, right? Like, scientists are tending to atomize, human beings, and like, they're more interested in how many atoms are in your like skeleton structure than they are your personal well-being as a person having a experience here, right? I talked about the experience of dark care that we went through in 2020, 2021. This is seeing that kind of subject matter-based thinking in the scientific community pervading the automatic, like, subconscious orders, the subconscious programs that came through all manner of authority, as well as reinforced by people that they trust, like, and respect. And voila. Okay. Let's see. But an act is never also an object, right? An experience only in their performance itself and given in reflection. Acts are something non-physical. Essentially, the person exists only in the performance of intentional acts and is therefore essentially not an object. Any physical objectification of acts, and hence any way of taking them as something physical, is tantamount to depersonalization. I wonder if he's speaking against objectivism, right? Which I don't think that objectivism does that, but he may have a bad interpretation of objectivism, perhaps. Or perhaps it's just because my objectivism is also not coming from Ayn Rand's worldview, and some people think that objectivism is inherently atheist, and it's not. Objectivism is inherently a blank slate. You can take your life, your gods that you believe in, and cast an overlay. It may change your relationship with your gods if your gods if you define your gods by what you think your relationship to your environment is. That's a different story. A person is in any case given as a performer of intentional acts which are bound together by the unity of a meaning. Thus, psychical being has nothing to do with the personal being. Acts get performed. The person is a performer of acts. What, however, is the ontological meaning of performance? How is the kind of being which belongs to a person to be ascertained ontologically in a positive way? But the critical question cannot stop here. It must face the being of the whole man who is... being of the whole... Ascertain ontologically. Questions face the being of the whole man who is customarily taken as a unity of body, soul, and spirit. In their turn, body, soul, and spirit may designate phenomenal domains which can be detached as themes for definite investigation. So there, he's also acknowledging tripartite soul. That's excellent. So he's right on point right there. Right now he's working off of good guiding posts. We're going to take a break in a couple minutes. Which certain limits, their ontological indefiniteness may not be important. When, however, we come to the question of man's being, this is not something we can simply compute. Let's see what he says at the bottom of the Annecdotes. Reading erechnet. The earliest editions have verechnet, with the correct reading provided in a list of errata. By adding together those kinds of being which body, soul, and spirit respectively possess, kinds of beings whose nature has not yet been determined, and even if we should attempt such an ontological procedure, some idea of the being of the whole must be presupposed. But what stands in the way of the basic question of Design's being, or leads it off the track, is an orientation thoroughly colored by the anthropology of Christianity and the ancient world, whose inadequate ontological foundation have been overlooked both by the philosophy of life and by personalism. These are two important elements in the traditional anthropology. So he goes after the anthropology of Christianity, right? So that's going over that means what has been collectively, culturally handed down as tradition and certain ways of thought that are put in through the church, which is damaging to a person's relationship with oneself. That's, I don't know if that's a big statement in his time, but that certainly would be a big statement depending on a certain period of time that you're in. Man is here defined. Actually, before we jump into this is where we'll take the break, and then we're going to go through this little list. And we got 5, 6, 7. We got about 3.5 pages left to go. So I'm pretty excited about it. There we go. Excelente. I'll let that ride for a second so I can try and kill the next ad that pops up. What do we got here? All right, that'll do. I didn't see an ad pop up. Okay. Okay, welcome back, everybody. Let's get on with the show. 1. Man is here defined as this word, and this is interpreted to mean an animal rationale, something living which has reason, but the kind of being which belongs to this is understood in the sense of occurring and being present at hand. I think that's the logos, right? Is some superior endowment, the kind of being which belongs to it. However, remains quite as obscure as that of the entire entity thus compounded. The second clue for determining the nature of man's being in essence is theological. One of these terms, it's a huge one, the faciamus hominem ad imaginem nostrum et similitudinem, which this is, with this as its point of departure, the anthropology of Christian theology, taking with it the ancient definition, arrives at an interpretation of that entity which we call man. But just as the being of God gets interpreted ontologically by means of the ancient ontology, so does the being of the ens finitum, and to an even greater extent in modern times, the Christian definition has been deprived of its theological character, but the idea of transcendence, that man is something that reaches beyond himself, is rooted in Christian dogmatics. Interesting. Let's see where he goes with this. Which can hardly be said to have been made an ontological problem of man's being. The idea of transcendence, according to which man is more than a mere something endowed with intelligence, has worked itself out with different variations. The following quotations will illustrate how these have originated. His Preclaris dotibus excelluit prima hominis conditio ut ratio intelligentia prudentia judicium non mondo ad terame vitae gubernationem superterrent sed quibus transcenderet usque ad Deum et aeternam felicitatem den das der Mensch in sin aufseffen hat auf gut und sin Wort zeigt klarlich en das nach seiner Natur net etwas Gott nachher enerborn etwas mi nachklagt etwas zu ihm hat, das alles on Zvel deras Flust, das nach dem Bildnis Gottes Gaschen ist. The two sources which are relevant for the traditional anthropology, the Greek definition and the clue which theology has provided, indicate that over and above the attempt to determine the essence of man as an entity, the question of his being has remained forgotten, and that this being is rather conceived as something obvious or self-evident in the sense of the being present at hand of other created things. These two clues become intertwined in the anthropology of modern times, where the res Cogitans, consciousness, and the interconnectedness of experience serve as the point of departure for methodical study. But since even the cogitations are either left ontologically undetermined or get tacitly assumed as something self-evidently, given whose being is not to be questioned, the decisive ontological foundation of anthropological problematics remain undetermined. This is no less true psychology, whose anthropological tendencies are today unmistakable, nor can we compensate for the absence of ontological foundations by taking anthropology and psychology and building them into the framework of a general biology, in the order which any possible comprehension and interpretation must follow. Biology as a science of life is founded upon the ontology of Dasein, even if not entirely. Life in its own right is a kind of being, but essentially it is accessible only in Dasein. The ontology of life is accomplished by way of a privative interpretation. It determines what must be the case if there can be anything like mere aliveness. Nur noch Leben. Life is not a mere being, present at hand, nor is it Dasein. In turn, Dasein is never to be defined ontologically by regarding it as life, in an ontological, indefinite manner, plus something else. Right. So it's very interesting that he's talking about all these things that apply to Dasein, and then making sure to distinguish that they are not Dasein itself. It's because Dasein is this complicated, elusive framework of the mind that he is trying to wrap your head around, that he has figured out, and trying to put into words, obviously, what is coming from a very deep flow state of going against the assumptions of the subject matter line of philosophy and psychology. Because remember, you're fighting for your main offshoot, like you're a big offshoot of like Jung or something, right? If you're an offshoot of Freud, rather, right? Jung is the most credible of everybody that kind of came after Jung, having a conversation that jumped off of Jung. And because much of Jung's work was so personable and practically applicable, and gave us a better reconciliation with this savage side that we had been conditioned to suppress in order to be good people. Things of this nature, right? And not throwing away the merits of Christianity in many respects, out of belief that we became a certain kind of civilized only because of certain things that Christianity is responsible for, right? And a lot of people, they're kind of done with that message, because they're starting to see how sanctimonious it was and how little any history makes sense, because civilizations were doing just fine without Christianity, and all Christianity did was come in and make a new level of excuse, a new conversation about the terms of warfare in particular. All right. In turn, design is never to be defined ontologically by regarding it as life itself, in an ontological indefinite manner plus something else, in suggesting that anthropology, psychology, and biology all fail to give an unequivocal and ontological adequate answer to the question. Sorry, hold on. Yeah, okay, we're good. Yes, okay. To the question about the kind of being which belongs to those entities, which we ourselves are. We are not passing judgment on the positive work of these disciplines. We must always bear in mind, however, that these ontological foundations can never be disclosed by subsequent hypothesis derived from empirical material, but that they are always there, already, even when that imperial material simply gets collected. If positive research fails to see those foundations and holds them to be self-evident, this by no means proves that they are not basic or that they are not problematic in a more radical sense than any thesis of positive science can ever be. 1 second, please. Thank you. All right. '11. The existential analytic and interpretation of primitive design. The difficulties of achieving a natural conception of the world. Primitive design. Okay, so this, I assume, means he's going to be looking at our understanding of primitive man in history and revealing how he has figured out where design exists in examples of what we know about them. The interpretation of design in its everydayness, however, is not identical with the describing of some primitive stage of design with which we can become acquainted empirically through the medium of anthropology. Everydayness does not coincide with primitiveness, but is rather a mode of design's being, even when that design is active in a highly developed and differentiated culture. And precisely then, moreover, even primitive design has possibilities of a being which is not of the everyday kind, and it has a specific everydayness of its own. To orient the analysis of design towards the life of primitive peoples can have positive significance, Bedetong, as a method, because primitive phenomena are often less concealed and less complicated by extensive self-interpretation on the part of the design in question. Primitive design often speaks to us more directly in terms of a primordial absorption of phenomena, taken in a pre-phenomenological sense, a way of conceiving things which seems perhaps rather clumsy and crude from our standpoint, can be positively helpful in bringing out the ontological structure of phenomena in a genuine way. But hereafter, our information about primitives has been provided by ethnology, and ethnology operates with definite preliminary conceptions and interpretations of human design. It's design, but it makes me think of design, and when I see it like that, it's human design, which, if you've never done your human design chart, go look up human design. Give me a moment. Okay. but heretofore our information about primitives has been provided by I'm sorry, I read that already, didn't I? Ontology more transparent. Okay. No matter, excuse me, no matter how easy it may be to show how ontological problematics differ formally from ontical research, there are still difficulties in carrying out. Oh, I'm sorry. Now I remember. I was all the way up here. I stopped because of human design and making that comment. And then I skipped ahead thinking I'd gotten to the end of a passage. Even in first receiving its material and in sifting it and working it up, whether the everyday ontology or even scientific psychology and sociology, which the ethnologists bring with him, can provide any scientific assurance that we can have proper access to the phenomena we are studying and can interpret them and transmit them in the right way, has not yet been established. Here, too, we are confronted with the same state of affairs as in the other disciplines we have discussed. Ethnology itself already presupposes as its clue an inadequate analytic of design. But since the positive sciences neither can nor should wait for the ontological labors of philosophy to be done, the further course of research will not take the form of an advance, but will be accomplished by recapitulating what has already been ontically discovered and by purifying it in a way which is ontologically more transparent. So it's just like continuing to refine the discussion and bring design into clarity. And he believes that once design has come into clarity, science will change its ways and get off of subject matter. No matter how easy it may be to show how ontological problematics differ formally from ontical research, there are still difficulties in carrying out an existential analytic, especially in making a start. This task includes a desideratum, which philosophy has long found disturbing, but has continually refused to achieve, to work out the idea of a natural conception of the world, the rich store of information now available as to the most exotic and manifold cultures and forms of design seem favorable to our setting about this task in a fruitful way, but this is merely a semblance. At bottom, this plethora of information can seduce us into failing to recognize the real problem. We shall not get a genuine knowledge of essences simply by the syncretistic activity of universal comparison and classification. Subjecting the manifold to tabulation does not ensure any actual understanding of what lies there before us as thus set in order. If an ordering principle is genuine and has its own content as a thing, Sachtegehalt, which is never to be found by means of such ordering, but is already presupposed in it. So, if one is to put various pictures of the world in order, one must have an explicit idea of the world as such, and if the world itself is something constitutive of for design, one must have an insight into design's basic structure in order to treat the world phenomenon conceptually. So this is now kind of bringing design in as a world, and with all the particularities of the actual meaning of the word world, whether they mean it or not, I can't help but think of it because of my knowledge of as where old, as we're always talking about. which is man-time. And that is so indicative of Dasein. Man-time is practically being in time, right? And so there's something of a universality that makes it appropriate to be a world phenomenon, something very uniform that is inescapably real, in particular, for human beings. And I don't know if there's going to be an argument for any animals in there. You know what I mean? In this chapter, we have characterized some things positively and taken a negative stand with regard to others. In both cases, our goals has been to promote a correct understanding of the tendency which underlies the following interpretation and the kind of questions which it poses. Ontology can contribute only indirectly towards advancing the positive discipline as we find them today. It has a goal of its own. Even if beyond the acquiring of information about entities, the question of being is the spur for all scientific seeking. So that should be the end of chapter 1. Is that what we're talking about here, right? So yeah, so that's 2, being in the world in general, which if I go like that, twofold task out of the question of being, no. 2, the formal structure of, right? Oh, I'm sorry, that's wrong. 2, being in the world in general. Yeah. All right, so, yep, good. All right, so that's it. The exposition of the task of the preparatory analysis of Dasein. We have read that chapter as a whole. How is your brain holding up? That's some thick molasses right there. All right, guys. Thank you so much for tuning in. This is Zerilath. I'd appreciate you checking out and inquiring about me and my ability to do tarot and runes as a reader. I would love to give you guys readings. I'd love to talk about doing that. Zerilath at yahoo.com. Zerilath at yahoo.com. All right, guys. You have a killer night.